Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled From Awareness to Prevention, Understanding Human Trafficking and Protecting Our Children. So this is the first part of a three-part series hosted by RATNAC International, with the remaining two happening in June and September of this year, and information about how to register will be shared after this meeting. Before we go any further into today's meeting, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that our organization, RATNAC International, operates on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. These lands have been stewarded by indigenous peoples since time immemorial, and we recognize their enduring presence, their culture, and contributions to this beautiful nation of Canada. We acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonialism and commit to learning, listening, and working in ways that respect Indigenous rights, relationships with the land, and paths towards reconciliation. Like I said earlier, my name is Tomi Ismail, and I'm the development manager here at RATNAC. Okay, now that we've done the introductions, I feel like I skipped the part. We were supposed to start with the opening prayer. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to pray again and hopefully get right on track. So, Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for our lives. We thank you for the gift of your presence in our lives. We thank you for bringing us here today for this webinar. We ask, Lord, that as we sit here and listen today, that you would teach us what to do, Lord. You would help us to understand what is being taught and help us to apply it to our lives in Jesus' name. For in Jesus' name I've prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so next up is some general housekeeping information. So as you can probably already tell, this session is being recorded, and recordings will be shared with attendees after the webinar. So if you need to leave a bit earlier, you would receive a recording of the full session after. Initially, everyone's microphone was muted, and I'm going to do that again, but I feel like everybody here understands that, we should keep our microphones muted. And then maybe during the question and answer session, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can type your questions in the Q&A chat area. If you are unable to mute yourself, yes, please use the chat option. You can also post your comments or questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll respond to it later. If you experience any difficulties, just try leaving and rejoining the meeting. And some things about the question and answer session as well. So they will be addressed as time permits, and they will go on till the end of this meeting. So if you have any further questions or comments, whatever it is that we don't address, you can send it to info@ratnac.org. The email address is I'll put it in the chat again, and then we would respond to you. And yeah, that's all the housekeeping information that I have for you. So I'm just going to start by telling us a bit about RATNAC International, and then give Ray, our presenter, a chance to speak. So I don't know how many of you, what you know about RATNAC or how long you've been supporters of RATNAC, but just for everyone's benefit, I would reintroduce RATNAC. So RATNAC International is a Canadian non-profit dedicated to ending human trafficking and exploitation in Cambodia. And this is work that we've been doing for over 35 years now. We have worked alongside local communities in Cambodia, other nonprofits there, government partners, and frontline practitioners to prevent exploitation, to protect survivors, and support long-term recovery. Most of our work focuses on several key areas: restoration, prevention, and return of people who have been trafficked. We work to prevent trafficking through education, community awareness, and programs that keep people safe. We also support survivors of human trafficking and exploitation through trauma-informed care, providing them with counseling, therapy, housing support, and reintegration services so that they can rebuild their lives with dignity and hope in their home communities. We also collaborate with governments in Cambodia so that we can strengthen the local systems and their capacity to respond better and prevent human trafficking. Another part of what we do is to ensure that survivors, the people in our care that we're servicing, receive holistic person-centered care to ensure that their recovery from trafficking is focused on themselves and is well-rounded. Our teams in Cambodia work tirelessly to do this work in collaboration with those of us here. We actually have an entirely Cambodian team of almost 70 people with just one Canadian. So we're very focused on allowing them to lead that work and to champion preventing trafficking in their home country. So next up is Ray, our executive director, who will be providing an overview, into slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the first part of a 3-part series, and the second and the third parts will be in June and September of this year. And we'll be providing information on how to register for those after this session. And you would also receive reminder emails. So over to you, Ray.
Awesome. So I think you'll find as I'm talking about this is a topic that I get quite passionate about. It's something that makes my heart beat strong. And I think for all of us here, there's an interest. We want to know more. We want to grow in this space. We want to understand how to be part of the solution to end slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. So this is an overview. We could talk days about this, days, because there's just so much to talk about. And so we're just going to dip our toes into it tonight, give an overview. To start off, I want to start off with giving a disclaimer. And so what I'm teaching about tonight, what I'm presenting on tonight, it is a sensitive subject matter. It pertains to slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. And so some of the material, some of the things that I discuss and share about might be difficult for us to encounter, to examine, to discuss. And if that's the case, if it causes, an emotional and or psychological response, always want you to take care of you first. And so if that means that you need to pause, you need to rest, you need to stop and resume as you're able to, please do that. Also, please feel free just to reach out, info@ratnac.org and just maybe share if something triggered you, if something stirred something up. We'd love to support and to pray and just to journey alongside you in this. Okay, so we're doing an overview. So first and foremost, we have 4 objectives tonight. First, we want to define, the key terms, the key concepts that are connected to modern slavery and human trafficking. Then we want to explore some of the common forms of modern slavery and human trafficking. And we're going to do that looking at it from a global perspective. So even as we do it from a global perspective, we're going to kind of bring it back home to Canada. But we're also going to keep it in a Cambodian scope as well, because as RATNAC, that's where we do frontlines work. We're going to examine some of the general sign, risk factors, and methods of recruitment. So we call this spot the ... So we're going to get into that a little bit. And then if time allows us, we're going to get into some basics of modern slavery and human trafficking. So looking at things like, who are the traffickers? And why is it difficult to exit a situation of modern slavery and human trafficking, MSHT? Okay, so those are the goals for tonight. So to start off, we're going to get into terminology. We're going to get into some of the important concepts. So when we say these words, slavery, human trafficking, exploitation, we're all standing in a common space together and we understand what they mean. So the first thing I want to share is, I don't know if you've heard the term modern slavery and human trafficking. It's used a lot in this space. It comes from the United Nations. They've adopted this terminology, modern slavery and human trafficking, to cover all forms of slavery and human trafficking. And so we see a lot of NGOs, a lot of churches, a lot of organizations and people adopting that same language. Now, when we use that word modern, alongside slavery. We're not saying that slavery hasn't always existed. It has existed even in the time of the Bible. It's always been there. We see with the transatlantic slave trade, that was a big part of history where we saw slavery happening. So we're not saying that slavery didn't ever happen. It's always happened. But when we use that term modern slavery, we're really talking about a period of time, this period of time that we're living in right now, and the work to end it. So modern slavery and human trafficking. So let's look at the first term. When we're looking at an official definition of slavery, it goes back to the Slavery Convention of 1926 and 1956. And so when it's defined as the status or condition of a person over who any or all of the powers attaching to the right of ownership are exercised. So when we're talking about this idea of slavery, it's really talking about the state of control of one person over another person. And that control is usually gained because they're using threats or they're using the actual use of violence. And that violence can be physical, it can be mental. When we talk about slavery, it's really referring to the possession and or exploitation of another person or persons in a manner that violates their human rights and will always deprive them of their individual freedom. Now, when we look at this concept of slavery and how it's happening today and even historically, there are a lot of core characteristics of slavery, and we could honestly spend hours talking about this. But I do want to point out a few core characteristics that I think are really at the heart of identifying if it's a situation of slavery or not. These core characteristics that I'm pointing out are part of a list that survivors, so individuals with lived experience, have put together themselves. So, core characteristics. One of the first core characteristics is that it's a state of control. And it's a state of control of one person over another person, again, based on threats of or actual use of violence, whether that's physical, mental, emotional. And this state of control is likened to the ideas of ownership and possession. So we know that you can't legally own or possess another person. But in slavery, what they do is they use control in such a way that that person controls another individual human being as if one might control a thing. It's about having a power, a control over someone, so much so that someone doesn't believe or feel that they have any power or any ability to change that situation. Slavery, we know it's not only characterized by that control, that position, that ownership, but they're being sold and bought as if they're a commodity, as if they're an object, as if they're a piece of property. So that's one characteristic. Another characteristic of slavery is being dehumanized. And they're dehumanized because they're treated and they're sold as if they're a commodity, as if they're a piece of property. And in the midst of that, they will be made to detached from their past. So they're taken away from their past, they're taken away from their loved ones, and they're told that that no longer exists for them, that that's not longer a possibility, that their past, their memories, their history, their family will never be seen again. But not only that, their future is taken away from them. They're not allowed to dream. They're not allowed to hope for something better because the situation of slavery that they find themselves in right now is so utterly hopeless, and it's absolutely never ending. And then in the process of this, their identity is stripped from them. A lot of times we see when people are in situations of slavery, their names will be changed or they just won't be given a name anymore. They're not allowed to have likes or dislikes. They will be called very demeaning, degrading names. very intentionally, those who are enslaving them will work to strip them of any form of identity. And any identity they have after that is what the enslaver makes it to be. And so in every way, they're dehumanized. Another core characteristic of slavery is restrictions. And restrictions will be placed on every area of their life. So their movement, where they can go, where they can't go, decision making, no longer able to make decisions. All decisions are made by those who enslave them. They no longer have choices. They're told what choices they have. They're told what to do. Their identity is reformed by those who are enslaving them. They're told what they can or can't do, what they can wear, what they can't wear, who they can talk to, who they can't talk to, what they can say, what they can't say. Every area of their life is absolutely monitored and absolutely restricted in so many different ways. And then the last core characteristic of slavery, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, there's so many characteristics, is a lack of compensation. And this lack of compensation is usually beyond what is required for survival. So if there is money being made, then that money will go to the person who is enslaving them. If they are allowed to keep a little bit of that money, then they'll probably be charged things like for food and for housing and to have clothing and medicine and to travel. So then they're going to have to pay that back. And then what ends up happening is that a very high interest rate is put on that. And there's no way that they could ever pay back the debt that the enslaver says that they have. If they do have a little bit of money, a lot of the times that money is sent home. And so nothing is kept for them in order to help them in the situation that they're in. So those are some of the core characteristics of slavery. So slavery. Next is the idea of human trafficking. And in 2000, the United Nations put together the preliminary protocol. And this is the definition globally of what human trafficking is supposed to be. The hope is that every country in the world will adopt this definition and use it as part of the work that they're doing to end trafficking in their countries. And so because of the preliminary protocol, human trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor, services, or sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of exploitation. And so it's a bit of an equation, and I put that equation on the screen here. We know that human trafficking is happening if three things occur. First is the act, and the act is really talking about what is being done. And what is being done is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of a person or persons. So you take the act, how it's done, and you add it to means. Oh, wait a second, I think I messed that up. So what is done is the act. The means is how it's done. So when we talk about the means and how it's done by threats or use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, vulnerability, or giving payments or benefits to a person and control of the victim. So you take the act, what is done, you add it to the means, how it's done, and then you add it to the purpose. And the purpose is always about why it's done. And it's always done for the purpose of exploitation. And that includes exploiting the prostitution of others, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, or similar practices, and the removal of organs. And so when you put this all together, acts plus means plus purpose, then you have a human trafficking situation. One thing that it's really important, and normally when I do this and I go more in depth, I would talk about force, fraud, or coercion, because those are also critical to the idea of human trafficking. You need to prove those. in a situation where an adult is potentially being trafficked. You don't have to prove that for a child. But coercion is an important idea for us to understand. And coercion is really about the manipulation mentally and emotionally of a person to trap them in a situation and get them to do what you want them to do. So an example of that would be if somebody was being trafficked and they realize what's going on. They don't want to be in this situation. So they say to the trafficker, I'm out of here. And the trafficker says back to them, no, you're not. Do you want to know why? Because I know you have children. I know you have a son and you have a daughter. And we know where they go to school. We know their schedule. We know where, they go after school. We actually have people watching them right now. So if you try to leave and if you don't do what we want you to do, we're going to kill your kids. And so now that person is like, oh my goodness, I don't want my kids to die. So I'll do what you want me to do. I'll stay. I'll let you exploit me the way that you want to exploit me and to benefit off of that. A lot of times when we're talking about human trafficking, people think that it's situations like that movie Taken with Liam Neeson. So it's a kidnapping and you're chained up and you're locked in a room and you're tied to a bed and there's you can't just leave. But what we see more often than not is that coercion is used in trafficking and slavery and exploitation, where it's invisible chains that are used on people where they say, I know where your family is. I know where your pets is. We will hurt them. We will kill them. We will do bad things to them if you don't stay here in this trafficking situation. Okay, human trafficking, coercion. The last one big concept that we want to talk about tonight is exploitation. And I have looked all over the place for a really good definition of exploitation. And the best I found was the Cambridge Business English Dictionary. And exploitation there is defined as the unfair treatment of other people for your own advantage. And it includes, at a minimum, the exploitation, again, of the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor, services, slavery, or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. We know that all situations of slavery and human trafficking are exploitation, but not all exploitative situations might be human trafficking or slavery. Okay, 3 terms very important to what we're talking about today. Now, I wanted to add in just a quick section here about how our language matters, how we talk about this, how we address people who have lived experience of slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation, how this is really, really important, and how we must carefully consider the words that we're using. Because we don't want to use language that is person blaming or victim blaming, saying that in some way they're at fault for the situation that they find themselves in. We don't want to use language that promotes stereotypes and stereotypes that are very negative and reinforces and promotes these false stereotypes and labels in our society. We don't want to use language that sensationalizes and generalizes what they're going through. And when we do that, it provides a misrepresentation of what slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation is. And it doesn't help people that when they're kind of faced or they see something that's off that might be human trafficking and exploitation, it keeps them from identifying what's going on right in front of them. And we don't want to use language that normalizes what happens to an individual who experiences slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. We want to use language that is person-centered, so it's affirming, it reflects the truth of the situation that they find themselves in. It views them as a whole person that maybe has walked through that situation of slavery, human trafficking, exploitation, but they're not defined by that. So here you see on your screen some words. First of all, when we're talking about slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation, we're never, especially for sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, we're never using the word prostitute or sex worker or hooker. The thing that we have to understand with slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation is that their consent has been taken away from them. They're not choosing this situation. They don't want to be in this situation. If they could be anywhere else doing anything else, they would be out of there. And so they are not a prostitute. They are not a sex worker. They are not a hooker. When it comes to children, children are not, we should not be using the word child prostitute or child hooker. We know that if they are a minor, so 18 years and younger, it is absolutely 100% illegal to exploit, enslave, traffic a minor. So there is no such thing as a child prostitute. There's no such thing as a child hooker. Also using the words criminal, offender, or even delinquent, again, puts the onus on them that they're the ones at fault. They're not the ones that have been forced into a situation and entrapped in a situation of slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. They're not criminals. They're not offenders. They're not delinquents. And so we want to be using words such as, a person who has experienced, or maybe they are experiencing slavery, human trafficking, exploitation, a person who is experiencing sex trafficking, labor trafficking, exploitation. The one that I like to use is a person with lived experience, a child who is being commercially, sexually exploited. When it comes to sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, we shouldn't be using the word John or client to describe the individuals who are purchasing sex from them. They are not a John. They're not a client, like I go to the dentist and I'm a client of my dentist, or, I'm a client of my doctor. It's not something we want to normalize. The reality of it is that they're buying sex. They're sex buyers. So we should call it for what it is. When we're talking about labor exploitation and labor trafficking, the person who is exploiting them for their labor is not their boss, is not their employer. That is their trafficker. That is their exploiter. So we should call it for what it is. And then we don't use the word rescue. Rescue has this connotation that the individual who is being exploited or trafficked, that they don't have autonomy, that they don't have choice. We know that the majority of people who are exiting situations of slavery, trafficking, exploitation are doing it not because somebody swooped in and helped them, but because they have navigated their way out of that. Rescuing is kind of this white savior, knight in shining armor mentality of swooping in and saving them and pulling them out and, oh, look at us kind of mentality. And so we want to stay away from that kind of language. Instead, we use language such as they exited, they left. Okay, a lot of stuff right there. If you have any questions, hang on to them, write them down, don't forget them. Definitely want to hear your questions at the end. So the next area that we're going into is forms of slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. Now, in order to help us to understand this, I am going to show some videos. So I do want to also give a trigger warning. There are some pretty strong images in some of them. So it's okay to take care of yourself in the midst of that. If you don't want to watch it, that's fine. But I do want to talk about first the global scope and then some of the forms that we see. This is not an exhaustive list. So when we're talking about sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, labor trafficking, labor exploitation, child trafficking, child exploitation, and forced marriages, those are not the only forms that we see on a global scale. We also see organ trafficking. We see child soldiers. We see orphanage trafficking. We see orphan trafficking. We see forced criminality. There is a lot of forms, but these four, I would say, are what we see a lot in Canada, but we also see a lot in Cambodia as well. So when we're looking at the global scope of slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation, We know that over the years, we have seen an increase to an estimated 49.6 million people around the world on any given day. This means worldwide, approximately 27.6 million people are experiencing forced labor and sexual exploitation. 22 million individuals are experiencing forced marriages. And when we say forced marriages, that also includes child marriages as well. We know that women and girls make up an estimated 11.8 million of those experiencing forced labor and sexual exploitation around the world. And we know that children make up more than an estimated 3.3 million of those experiencing forced labor and sexual exploitation globally. 49.6 million people. So, first form that we're going to talk about, sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. And so if we're looking at kind of the legal definition of it, it's the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sexual act. So if we're going to kind of say that, in maybe some easier terms, we're saying that sex trafficking is when a person is lured, they're tricked, or manipulated to sell their body for sex, to make money for someone else. And again, sex trafficking is always for the purpose of sexual exploitation. We know that in Canada, we know in Cambodia, we know globally that sex trafficking and sexual exploitation can be found in the act of prostitution, pornography, exotic dancing, strip clubs, massage parlors, modeling studios, adult stores, escort services, and unofficial and official brothels. We also know that with sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, it has extreme short and long-term traumatic effects on those who experience them. So to help us to understand more what sex trafficking, sexual exploitation could look like, I'm going to show a video. Again, if you feel like you can't watch that video, this is fine. This is a video that was put out from the government of Canada. It's going to go into a method of recruitment that we're going to talk about. And for Canada, it's probably the most used method of recruitment. It's also used globally quite extensively and in Cambodia as well.
A message from the Government of Canada.
So that's an example of what it can look like. So when we're looking at, again, global scope of this, we said 49.6 million people are living in, modern slavery since 2022 and on. Within that 49.6, 27.6 million are in forced labor. So when we're talking about forced labor and it's being defined, it also includes commercial sexual exploitation. So out of that 27.6 million, 6.3 million are in forced commercial sexual exploitation. And then women and girls account for 4.9 million of that 6.3 in forced commercial sexual exploitation. Okay, so you see how, especially with sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, women and girls, but there's still a number in that where we see men and boys being exploited for sex as well. Okay, so that's the first form that we're going to talk about tonight. Another one that we see quite often, Canada, globally, Cambodia, is labor trafficking for the purposes of labor exploitation. And so when we look at a definition of this, it's all worker services which is exacted from any person under the menace of any penalty and for which that said person has not offered themselves voluntarily. So what does it look like for labor trafficking, labor exploitation, Canada, Cambodia, globally? And again, this is not an exhaustive list. It can happen in restaurants, in food preparation, in sweatshops, in commercial agricultural, which is a big one here for Canada, and hotels and other hospitality services. We see it in criminal organizations when they're doing marijuana grow operations or drug carriers. We see it on construction sites, private residences. We see it in domestic servitude, housekeeping, nannies, live-in caregivers. We see it through temporary migrant worker programs. We see it in beauty salons. Now, again, when I say this, I'm not saying, first of all, this is not an exhaustive list. But second of all, I'm not saying that every beauty salon has labor exploitation happening. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is we have seen it a lot in these different industries, globally, Canada, Cambodia. So again, I want to show you an example of what labor trafficking for the purposes of labor exploitation can look like.
Hi, good morning.
Oh, hi, come on in. If you need anything, we'll be in the other room.
Thank you.
This should have been done already. You're so careless and clumsy. Can't you remember anything I taught you?
I'm not gonna ginawa mo.
Makanda ka na ba sa trabaho na to?
I've got a feeling you're busy. Ano nga ang pangalan? O yan, tikman mo yan. Para sa'yo.
Basta ka na. Kung nga pala si Randy na, excited ka.
Head southeast on West Harbor Drive toward
What took you so long to get inside?
Akin na. Ako na muna magtatay. Honey?
This is your room and this is your bed. This can't keep going on like this.
Mahal ko rin.
Okay. So there's an example of what labor trafficking and labor exploitation can look like. So what is the global scope of this? Going back to our stats, so 49.6 million people. Of the 27.6 million people in forced labor, that 17.3 million are exploited in a private sector. So we're talking homes, private residences. 3.9 in forced labor imposed by state. So that can be conscription into armies, it can be prison systems. And then women and girls account for 6 million of those in forced labor in other economic sectors. So you can see with forced labor, majority being exploited, men and boys, but there is also the presence of women and girls in there as well. Okay, third form that we're going to look at, child trafficking and child exploitation. So when we look at the definition of this, it's the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, and or receipt of a child for the purpose of slavery, forced labor, that includes sexual labor, and exploitation, both sexual and labor. So if we were to sum this up easier, we're really talking about child trafficking for the purposes of child exploitation is taking children out of their protective environment and preying on their vulnerability for the purpose of exploitation. So again, I'm going to show you another video. Okay, and so what you saw there in 34 seconds is probably the number one way we see right now children being recruited into situations of trafficking and exploitation. We're going to talk a lot more about grooming in the third part of this webinar, so more in September, when we're also talking about internet safety and how to work with our children to empower, to protect, and build resilience in them, especially in this area. Okay, last one. Oh, global scope. So just before we go to the last one. So again, 49.6 million people living in modern slavery as of 2021, 2022. And we know that children make up more than an estimated 3.3 million of those experiencing forced labor and sexual exploitation globally. Okay, last form I'm going to show you tonight. Again, we're not going through all the forms that we see globally. Forced marriages. And so when we look at the definition of a forced marriage, there are marriages in which one and or both parties have not personally expressed their full and free consent to that union. And that's really important, that full and free consent. So that's a forced marriage. Within that, it can branch into a child marriage. And a child marriage is considered to be a form of forced marriage. And it's one or both parties have not given their free and full and conformed consent. And either one or both parties in this marriage are children, are minors. When we look at child marriages, we know that can happen to both boys and girls, but we see it happening more with girls. And we see girls are being usually married off to older men. They're put into a domestic setting where they're living in very slavery-like conditions. And again, forced marriages, child marriages is a violation of human rights and has very, very negative consequences for the health and personal development of those who are in those situations. So I'm going to show you a video. This video has some strong images in it. I just want to share that before we go in. If you can't watch it, that's fine, but I want everybody to be prepared.
My cousin said, apparently, you spend like a month in the pind, being treated like you're the one. It sounds like an alright month if you ask me. As long as I got Wi-Fi, because I'm going to be online every day messaging the girls. My mum's been so funny chatting about marriage when she knows I got my GCSEs next year. Oh, they're important, man. I've got to take my books for me and do some hard work. I showed Jazz his photo and she was all like asking if I'm going to get with him. And I said, well, yeah, if he's hot. What, have you never heard of an holiday romance? Marriage. That's funny, man. I mean, even if he shows me how to get an A in physics, I'll be like, respect for the help, yeah, Dash, but I got a plane to catch. See ya.
So again, when we look at prevalence, we know 49.6 million people are living in modern slavery since 2021, 2022. 22 million of those are in forced marriages. So every year, it's estimated that 15.4 million girls and boys are forced into marriages without their consent. 80% of those are women and girls. 37% of these individuals were under the age of 18 at the time of marriage. And of those, 44% were under the age of 15 at the time of marriage. UN says that a minor is 18 years and under. There are 12 million girls married before the age of 18 every year. That's 23 girls every minute. That's nearly 1 in every 3 seconds. 1 in 5 girls in the world are said to be married before 18, and over 650 million women alive today were married as children. In Cambodia, and we're going to talk about that actually probably right now. I'll tie this into Cambodia. So we looked at a global scope. We looked at 4 forms. Those forms, again, are here in Canada. Forced marriages, child marriages are happening here in Canada as well. All of those forms we see happening in Cambodia and the work that we do as RATNAC International as well. So it is estimated, well, human trafficking and exploitation, it does continue to escalate in Cambodia. It has an estimated 83,000 Cambodians currently trapped in slavery or other related abuses to slavery, trafficking, and exploitation. And 2024, authorities investigated 197 cases and recovered more than 500 individuals with lived experience. Now, 197 cases to the authorities, to law enforcement. But we know that this is, it's illegal, it's a criminal act, so it's very underground. So those are the ones that law enforcement knows about. There's a lot more than that going on. Forced marriages is the most common form of trafficking that we see in Cambodia. Forced marriages of women and girls to individuals in China. It's followed by forced labor and then sexual exploitation. But as well, there is more of a spotlight. There is a rising concern around scamming hubs where both Cambodians and foreign nationals are trafficked, they're confined, and they're forced to commit cyber fraud under very exploitative, abusive, dangerous situations. Okay, so those are the forms. If you have any questions, hang on to them. We're going to get it towards the end. But now we're going to jump into spot the ... Spot the signs, spot the risk factors, spot the methods of recruitment. So no matter where we live in the world, chances are that trafficking, exploitation, slavery is happening around us. It's happening in our own backyard. It's happening on a daily basis. And so when we're talking about slavery and human trafficking and exploitation, we're talking about it for us as RATNAC. We want to end it in Cambodia. And so for us, it's important for us to know the signs, risks, factors, and methods of recruitment. But it's also important for us to talk about it here in this webinar because those signs, those risk factors, those methods of recruitment are also very relevant to the country that we live in here in Canada. And so for us to even be part of the solution to end it, we need to understand what some of those signs, what some of those risk factors, what some of those methods of recruitment are. There are a lot of signs, a lot of risk factors, a lot of methods of recruitment, and we don't have time to go through all of them. And so what I've done is kind of picked maybe the top 4 or 5 for each that are not only relevant to Cambodia, but are also very relevant to Canada as well. So let's talk about spot the signs. And they're just that, those red flags, those warning bells, that siren, that maybe something that you're seeing that's happening in front of you that you're witnessing might be a situation of trafficking and exploitation. We know that one of these on their own could mean a wide variety of things, but when we start saying 2 or 3 or more happening together as signs, it's an indication for us to set up and take notice and start asking some more questions. So 5 general signs, again, not an exhaustive list. The first one is that they're not able to leave or quit their work or change their circumstance if and when they want to. And so that person experiencing slavery, human trafficking, exploitation, they're not able to physically leave and quit their job that they're doing. They're not able to change their work if and when they want to. And if they try, there's extreme consequences that they're going to face. They're going to be found. They're going to be brought back. It can mean death for them. It can mean extreme violence against them, but not only for them, for their families, for their friends, for their pets if they try to leave. There's no possibility that they could ever exit this situation. So that's one sign. Another sign is that they're going to be forced to work in degrading and unfair conditions. So many people in these types of situations will work anywhere between 12 to 20 hours per day. There's no overtime. There's no lunch or bathroom breaks. They can't call in sick. They have no protective gear. They will be asked to perform tasks and jobs that are unsafe and degrading and unreasonable. They will receive little to no pay. What they were promised for wages or what's legally required will not be given to them. If they do receive any money, it's going to be way below what was promised or what's legally required and is what needed for them to survive. A lot of the times people in these situations, they get nothing because all of it goes to the trafficker. All of it goes to the exploiter. When you're being forced to work in degrading and unfair condition, it also will mean that they potentially will live and work in the same place. So if you're making clothing, you're maybe working in a tiny room downstairs and it's very overcrowded, it's unsafe, but then there might be a space above or beside where everybody is living there. There may not be running water. There may be one toilet, but it doesn't work. No cooking facilities, no beds. It might be very unsafe to live there. No electricity, no heat. So there's that one. Another general sign is fear for safety. And they're not only fearing for their own safety, but they're also fearing for the safety of their loved ones. And so those traffickers, those exploiters are going to use threats of violence, and then they're going to use violence to make people who are experiencing those situations stay in that situation, to keep them in line, to control them, to have power over them. This one is really important as well for trafficking and exploitation for a sign. All personal identification documents are taken away and they're held by another. So that person who's experiencing this will not have access to their personal identification documents, to their passports, to their driver's license, to their birth certificate, anything that would identify them as them. It is taken away from them. It is locked up. They cannot ask for it. They cannot hold it. They cannot see it. They cannot get it back. And if they do try to get it, extreme consequences for them. And then the last sign I wanted to talk about today is debt bondage. So they may be paying back a debt, for being provided work. So we've seen people in these situations of slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation taking out a loan from the trafficker, from the exploiter, in order to get the work that's being promised to them. Then they have to pay it back to that trafficker, to that exploiter. But that loan is going to have an impossible interest rate attached to it. So therefore, it's going to pull them deeper and deeper and deeper into that situation of human trafficking and exploitation, where they feel like they can't get out because they have this impossible debt to pay back. So those are 5 signs. There is many, 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 many more signs than that. But these are some of the more common ones that we see globally in Canada and Cambodia. So spot the risk factors. When we're talking about risk factors, it's important to point out that anyone can be targeted, they can be groomed, deceived, manipulated, forced, coerced, controlled, and exploited by traffickers and exploiters. But the following factors can increase someone's or a community or a people group's vulnerability to be trafficked and exploited. And again, there's many we can talk about here, but here's 5 that are very common to Canada, but also to Cambodia and also globally. So first is the fact of just being born a girl, being born a woman. So gender inequality. And we see that in many cultures, women are seen as less than men. They're paid less for equal work. They have fewer rights, less access to health and education and property. They're expected to be submissive to men. And when we're talking about submissive, this is not like the godly submissive that we see in the Bible, but it's about control and power and dominance. And so because of that, they're more vulnerable to be recruited by traffickers and exploiters. Another risk factor is poverty. Traffickers will specifically target communities that are experiencing poverty and marginalization to offer individuals who feel desperate to provide for themselves and their families deceptive and or exploitative opportunities to improve their situation and their circumstances. And so when you're told that you can make $3,000, a week, and you can use that to send home, and your family is going to survive, and they're going to be able to have a place to live and have food on their table, people will make very dangerous decisions to go into that situation because they want to escape poverty. Another risk factor is economic vulnerability. So that lack of work or access to legal workplaces, people in high stress situations as they struggle to survive and provide for themselves and, family members who are dependent upon them. And because of that, they're more likely to take greater risks to fulfill the goal of getting a job, to avoid poverty, to avoid eviction and starvation and homelessness. Another risk factor is lack of access to education. So individuals with limited education or people who are illiterate will likely have fewer income generating opportunities, whether in the formal or informal economic sectors. And again, traffickers and exploiters, they love that and they'll take advantage of that. And on a global scale, this one greatly affects women and girls. Because if you're in a culture where, again, you are poverty, limited opportunities, and you only have enough money to educate one person in your family, a lot of cultures will choose to educate their boys because they think their boys will provide a future and security and safety for them, for the parents when they're older. And so then the girls don't get educated as well and become more vulnerable. And then the last one is a history of abuse. And we're really speaking into childhood abuse. And childhood abuse can really groom and position and prime potential victims making it seem like the abuse that they're going to experience in a trafficking situation is normal, and therefore not being able to say, hey, this isn't normal. This is actually abnormal, and what's happening to me is wrong. And so it's been normalized in their lives. And again, traffickers will very intentionally look for people who have a history of abuse in their lives in order to get them into a situation of trafficking and exploitation. So those are some risk factors. And again, there's a lot more we can be talking about. The last one is methods of recruitment. So here are some of the most common methods of recruitment that we see in Canada, we see in Cambodia, we see globally. So the first one is, you saw in the video for sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. It's that romantic partner. It can also be somebody pretending to be a friend. This is, again, like I said, a very popular technique for recruiting. It's called also the Romeo or the lover boy. And basically what ends up happening is that romantic partner could be male or female, and they will draw that person into their lives by finding an opportunity to connect with them. Then they begin to love bomb them. So gifts, opportunities, jewelry, a lot of attention, a lot of, words of affirmation. And then they flip the switch. And so all of a sudden, those promises of love and affection that was being offered to them is seen for what it is. It's an illusion. And now they're being told that if they want to keep their love, if they want to be in this relationship, then the only way for them to do that is for them to help pay the bills, which means that they need to go sell their bodies for sex. They keep none of the money. It goes to this romantic partner who is the trafficker and the exploiter. Same with friendships. It works very similar. They provide friendship, and then we'll offer them a great opportunity or introduce them to somebody who can help them or would be a really great friend or something that they need. So that's one really popular. The other really popular way is deceptive job advertisements. So promising deceptive, manipulative, financially secure opportunities locally or abroad to people looking to better their situation in life. This usually results in debt owned by that individual to the trafficker that is attached to that impossible interest rate that we were talking about. But that deceptive job opportunity could also be a deceptive educational or travel opportunity where they're promised the ability to obtain an education. So really capitalizing on a family's desire to improve their situation out of poverty or to go on an adventure to see the world, but they're not going to see the world. Another method of recruitment we see quite often is sale by a family member and or sale of service by a family member or trusted individual. So that family member can be a parent, an uncle, auntie, a sibling, a grandparent. They may sell another family member to receive that short-term and an immediate financial aid. It may help that if they sell them, it's one less mouth to feed, body to clothe, medicine to provide for. It could also be a trusted individual. So it could be a family friend, an elder in the community, a respected member of the community. And then the last one I want to talk about is online. And with online recruitment, traffickers recruit, groom, and control potential victims on various online sites by identifying vulnerable individuals through their social media presence and then building a relationship with them. And as I shared already, this is one that we see happening too much with our young people. And so we're going to talk about internet safety in our third webinar. So taking all of this, when we look at Cambodia, it's all this. The general signs: can't quit if they want to, unfair conditions, personal identification will be taken away, fear for safety and their loved ones, debt bondage, methods of recruitment. The most popular in Cambodia is deceptive job opportunities, then romantic partners, online advertisement, sale of service, and then risk factors, poverty, migration without protection, leading to abuse, low education and awareness, women and girls, gender inequality. And then in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, so the genocide that happened in 1974 to 1975 has that legacy from it has really weakened communities and safety. Okay, we're getting close to the end. So just some basic stuff about slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. So who are the traffickers? So you can see on your screen there, this is not an exhaustive list, but this gives you an idea of who can be the traffickers. We know that human trafficking, it really is a lucrative criminal activity for traffickers because it's considered to be low risk for them, but it's going to generate significant revenue. Trafficking in a year, it's estimated that it generates 150 billion US dollars per year. So anyone who knowingly contributes in the trafficking of people with the intent of exploiting them is considered to be a human trafficker. So this includes everybody from recruiters to the middlemen to the transporters to the people who create the false documents to corrupt officials and employers. There's been research done around traffickers. So here's some things we know about traffickers. A trafficker exploiter can be of any ethnicity, age, and gender. Traffickers often belong to the same ethnic group of their victims. Victims are trafficked globally, usually by someone who originally comes from the same country. These recruiters often come from the same province, and they often come from the same community. Having a common language and culture allows traffickers to better understand their victims in order to exploit them. We know that a trafficker can be anyone, even a family member, who will use their victim's trust to exploit them. We know that traffickers and exploiters can be employed. They can be professionals. They can be unemployed. We know that they're always going to present themselves in a way to gain the trust of their victims, so as a friend or as a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Traffickers, we know, can be a part of organized criminal networks, so gangs, mob, mafia, but they can also operate independently. We've also seen female traffickers and exploiters, and they're usually the ones who will recruit women and children if the lover boy and Romeo is not being used. And they're seen as being more credible, more gentle, more motherly to women and children. And then we also see victims of trafficking and exploitation becoming traffickers and exploiters themselves. For some, this is the only thing that they know that will earn them money. It will also, for some, it gets them out from being actually trafficked and exploited and out of that situation. And for some, because of the way that they've been recruited, they've been recorded doing some kind of criminal activity, it's used against them. And so then they have to become a trafficker and exploiter themselves. So who are the traffickers? You see it on your screen. There's some information about them. So the last thing before we open it up into questions, one of the things that I get asked all the time is, why don't people who are experiencing this, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just get up and walk out of this situation? And when it's asked that way, it's actually really asked as a shaming question, because we're assuming that they have power and control in their trafficking and exploitation situation, and that they could actually do that. But I hope in the bit that we've talked about today that you would see that that's actually not the case, that power, control, coercion, recruiting methods, all that kind of stuff entraps them in situations of trafficking, exploitation, and slavery. But just to break it down a little bit more, why it's not as easy to exit. First of all, language barrier. If you don't speak the language or dialect of the country or the part of the country that you're brought to, how do you explain to someone when you can't speak the language what's going on to you? How do you get them to understand the danger that you're in? Sometimes it's hard to exit because of fear of repercussions. And that's usually because they're told that if they leave, then the trafficker and their associates will find them. They will kill them. They will kill their families. They will kill their friends. A reluctance to report to law enforcement. In some places, law enforcement officers may be part of the trafficking that is happening to that individual. Other times, we've heard often that when somebody is being brought into their situation of trafficking and exploitation, especially if it's sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, that traffickers and their associates will dress up as if they're law enforcement and then repeatedly assault physically and sexually that individual as part of breaking them down. So when that happens to you, then you're scared also to go to law enforcement because you think it's law enforcement doing it to you. For some, it's not easy to leave because of stigma and feelings of not being understood by mainstream society. So many people in the general public don't have this understanding or training of what is slavery, exploitation, and trafficking, and don't understand what they've gone through. And so they're scared that they'll be ostracized, that there's a lot of stigma that will go towards that. There's a lot of shame. Fear of criminalization and forced to do illegal or humiliating acts. Both of these speak into how the traffickers force people who are in these situations to commit illegal activities or humiliating acts that are recorded and then photographed and then used against them. And they're told that if you don't do this, we're going to release it to the public. If you don't do this, we're going to release it to law enforcement and you're going to be arrested. And if you think it's bad for you now, it's going to get so much more worse. Another reason is we have seen that people experiencing this, they have intimate relationships, traumatic bonding with the trafficker. So if you're in a romantic relationship, if that person thinks that they love them, that they've had children with them, they may not want to leave. They may not want to leave their children behind because the trafficker is using their children against them to keep them there. Or traumatic bonding could have happened where they may want to protect their trafficker, their exploiter, even though they're being exploited and trafficked by them. They may fear deportation. So they may be in the country illegally and fear deportation, which the trafficker and exploiter uses against them over and over. They might be in a vulnerable situation. So if they left their trafficking and exploitation situation, they might be going back to something worse. And they don't want to go back to something worse. And so they're willing to put up with what's happening with them, even though it's a violation of human rights and their individual freedom. And then for a lot, they don't self-identify as a victim or a person experiencing slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. I can't even begin to tell you the amount of conversations I've had with individuals with lived experience where they were like, this is not happening to us. What do you mean? No. So a lot don't self-identify as being people in those situations. Okay. That is everything I got for you for tonight. And so I want to open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay, thank you, Ray. So that's exactly what I was wanting, was an overview of this area. So thank you so much for that. I'm curious, what is the role of the Cambodian government in all of this?
Yeah. So I have to say, I've worked in different spaces globally, working to end slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation. The Cambodian government is exciting because they recognize that slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation is wrong. It's a criminal activity. They are very much so working with different NGOs, civil actors, to end it. And so, speaking from Ratnak International, the experience that we've had, 36 years in that country. And we've worked long and hard to build a relationship with the government where we can go in and do advocacy work. And so we are invited into a lot of spaces with the government to speak into policy, to speak into systems and structures, how to build them, how to transform them. We work with the government to create policies and guidelines. So standard operating policies, repatriation of Cambodians with lived experience by air. We've been able to work with them to create guidelines and policies and processes that they have then taken, reviewed, accepted, and now are becoming national standards. So there's training happening all throughout the country with them. We're currently working with the government to create guidelines, policy process for repatriation by land borders. So it's exciting to work with them because it is a government that sees this for what it is, but also wants to be part of the solution and ending it. Is it a perfect system? Is it a perfect government? Well, I'd like to try to find any government in this world that's perfect and not flawed. But I do applaud the Cambodian government for their effort and their sincerity in stepping into this space and working with NGOs and other actors to put an end to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray, it was a really great overview. And I guess the thought I had was apart from feels pretty bleak in terms of how you combat such a multi-layered, I think, area of criminality. But I just was wondering how much, from your experience at Ratnak, how much trafficking is sort of domestic to Cambodia and how much of it is actually exporting, as it were?
Yeah, I would say a good chunk of it, the majority would be exporting outside of Cambodia to countries like China, forced marriages. That's number one country where that's happening with us. But then forced labor into countries like Thailand and Vietnam. And Malaysia. So we see that happening as well. But then internally, we see sex trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation. So karaoke bars. We see that happening. And then there is a huge spotlight right now on scam hubs. And we have a lot of scam hubs that are within the country or on the borders that we share with other countries. And so there has been a crackdown, not only with Cambodian government, but other governments as well, trying to understand what is going on and then how do we end this. So I would say it's both internal and external.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, good question, Mike. Any other questions that you're burning to ask?
I just want to know, like in Canada.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of imports into Canada from Cambodia or other countries, or is it more localized, or?
It's a mix. So 93% of sex trafficking victims, domestic sex trafficking victims, are Canadian born. That's a staggering number. Just over 50% of that are Indigenous women and girls. So they are a very high risk population that we have within our country. We do, so that's sex trafficking, sexual exploitation. We do have labor trafficking, labor exploitation as well. But it's individuals who are coming into the country through legal means. So through our temporary foreign workers program as seasonal workers on our agricultural farms. And so again, I'm not saying that every temporary foreign worker coming in is being exploited for their labor. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that we have seen this happen through the temporary foreign workers program on farms, coming in on a work visa, maybe for a restaurant, maybe for a laundry facility, different spaces like that, where it's your visa, your work visa is tied to one business, one individual. And it's very easy to slide into exploitation within that. We don't have really like a mechanism for reporting and follow-up. So again, there's another vulnerability right there as well. But we see it happening there too. So it's a bit of both.
So if you sense or know of something like that going on, is there a place to report it or?
Yes, and that's a really great question. And it's been a while since I thought of this number, so I got to Google it really quick. But in Canada, we do have a human trafficking hotline. It's open 24/7. It's like, I think, over 200 different languages where you can get translation. Hotline Canada. Oh, it's going to really make me work for it.
Well, while you're working just a little bit, just a quickie. I was down at Canada Place in the summer with a friend, and just at a table next to us, there was a gentleman. He was quite well dressed, not overly, and he had two fellows coming to the table to eat with him. Obviously, I would say South American.
Okay.
And the way he just my ears, because I was born in South America, and I was listening a little bit to it, and it sounded like he was recruiting them for something, and it just gave me such an awful feeling.
Yeah.
And so all I did was said to my friend, I said, I think we better pray for these two just young men, and they were just sitting there taking it all in and kind of saying, nodding yes and so on. And I thought, no, this looks like something that's not good.
Yeah,
we couldn't report anything because you don't know who it was.
Yeah.
We reported it to the Lord, so maybe he did something about it. I don't know. But it was a really fun, it was a very unique experience to see and hear.
Yeah. And, all throughout Canada, there's a human trafficking route. Nova Scotia is becoming one of the hottest spots for human trafficking and exploitation. You kind of come into Nova Scotia. From there, you're going to go to Toronto. Then you have the corridor that you're going to drive along. Niagara Falls is right in there, going into Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Regina, coming out this way, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and then going up north, Fort McMurray, the oil rigs. I mean, it is all over the place. Quebec also has quite a few trafficking, especially outside of spaces like Montreal, where once you get outside of Montreal, it's less English. And so we have been seeing like a lot being recruited outside smaller communities and brought to places like Alberta. And again, when you only speak French and you're not able to communicate in English, it's hard to tell people what's going on. Traffickers are very smart and will use that. So it's definitely happening all over our country. And then you bring in the temporary foreign workers, seasonal agricultural workers in Mexico, Jamaica. It's in our country. It's the estimated average is 17,000 individuals are experiencing slavery, human trafficking, and exploitation on any given day in Canada. I also put in the chat the Canadian human trafficking hotline number. It's 1-833-900-1010. So you can call them, you can say, I think this is what's going on, or, I have this question, and they're 24/7, 365 days a year, over 200 languages. That's a good resource for us here in Canada.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? It's kind of like marriage. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I don't have any other questions, Ray, but I just wanted to thank you for this time. I need to drop now because I've got to go to another meeting, but thank you so much. I look forward to the next 2 webinars.
Yeah, invite friends. If you have questions, info@ratnock.org. Feel free to email me there. We'll definitely respond.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming, Mike. And I think I'm going to pass it back over to Tommy.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I really hope that this session, bye, Stephen. I really hope that this session has been informative and helpful for you. So our next webinars, we have one in June on the 16th of June, and then another one on the 22nd of September. So we would share the links on how to register for those. So the one in June is the first part of how to protect and empower our kids. And then the one on September 22nd is how to protect and empower our kids, part 2. And we would share the information closer to the dates. You can also check our website. I put it in the chat. So you can check there for the link on how to register. And I would also send an email beforehand, just like to invite you to register for it. So like I said earlier, this webinar is recorded. So we'll be sending out the recordings to people who attended. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to send an email to info@ratnac.org. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy days to join us today, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Maybe just before we say goodbye, Tommy, can you just end us off in prayer? Because we did talk about a lot of heavy things.
Sure. Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for this webinar. We thank you for Ray, for all the attendees. We pray, Lord, that you would help us. You would help us to do this work of trying to end human trafficking and exploitation. We pray, Lord, that you would give us the grace to be able to handle all this heavy information that we've received today. We pray, Lord, that you strengthen us. And we also pray for the government systems here in Canada, in Cambodia, and all around the world, that you would give them the wisdom and the knowledge and the might and the will to be able to end human trafficking and slavery. For in Jesus' name I've prayed. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.